I think that's good. All right, so what we got here is a Google Sheet, a new set of criteria that I came up with. And these are not all-inclusive criteria, but I think they're a good set that you should consider when you're thinking about who to build up for an AR tank. And we're going to run through what they are, and then we're going to run through various heroes and how well they hold up against these criteria. And again, the inspiration for this was seeing people making videos that I think are not correct about who's the best Omegatanks in AR. I think it's also incorrect to set this up as a tiered system because there's so many things you need to consider, especially who you're fighting, um, and other things that we'll go over as well. So the first thing we're talking about is what the criteria are. So this one's sort of a one-off criteria. The only criteria here is that it can benefit from blessings. So the only criteria is that it's not air. So that's pretty much everyone. Uh, as you probably know, light blessings will give your unit, if you're using 2 airs, plus 10 HP, plus 10 res on light season, and you want that. That's very good for your bulk. That's very good for tanking meta threats. So that's a one-off criteria. I'm saying that everyone has that, basically, except air. The next one is what kind of movement type is your unit and what kind of weaknesses do they have. So ideally they're infantry, which means they have no effective weapons against them, except for Poison Dagger, which nobody uses, and unless someone's using like Kagami Mochi and you're tanking with a mage, which you shouldn't. Um, Another thing to consider here is if you're a dragon infantry, then you've got weakness to dragon effective weapons. So I think that actually is a thing that I didn't write this down yesterday, but if you're a dragon, you get 1/2 points here. Um, Another bonus for this is if you're using older infantry, you get plus 10 flowers, and the flower costs are pretty prohibitive on non-infantry units. If you're just adding 5, then the cost to upgrade stats gets very high very fast. But if you're an first gen infantry, you can pretty much add 5 stats without spending many flowers. It's like 80 or 100. It's pretty cheap. So that's good. Infantry are also the only unit type that can use Null C Disrupt. And for the Mega Tank that you're trying to use in every situation in AR, having a counter to Fire Sweep is really good. Uh, for those of you who watch Akros' stream, he doesn't use Null C Disrupt. He still manages to get around the situations, but it makes the matches much tougher, and having that tool makes Fire Sweep maps just kind of a joke in a lot of cases, because they're set up in a way that plans for not facing enemies with Null C Disrupt. The next thing is physical damage, and that's because air is everywhere. Air is on a lot of defense teams, and if you're fighting air with Mystic Boost, or any enemy with Mystic Boost, but most commonly it's air, you're not going to deal good damage with res hitting unit. So dragons, for example, don't meet this criteria. They're going to do nothing against air. They can't counter twice against Lithiaburg, and they will lose a lot of health, and air is a threat to dragons. So that's that. Also to consider is if you're on light season and the airs on the defense team with light blessed units, they also get some bonuses. I'll be just checking chat periodically to make sure we're not missing anything. All right. So the next thing you want is a melee unit, and that means dragon, stone, sword, axe, lance, beast. It doesn't mean tomes, doesn't mean bows. And the reason for that is that melee units have higher BST than range units, and the point of a Mega Tank is to basically stat stack the crap out of them, and every single stat point counts. Another thing is when melee units get more stats from their weapon refines. Mage units get like +2 speed instead of +3 that a melee unit would get, and +5 HP instead of +3. So this is just better for stat stacking. And you're going to see actually that a lot of these have something to do with stat stacking, but they're sort of translated into a way where you consider it from a unit standpoint. The next criteria is that you can merge them, and this means they're in the 3 or 4-star pool, or you have grails, or there's something you already have merged. If you have a previous merge project, such as Noe, then even though they're not meeting some of these criteria, like a dragon, is bad to have for these two things. If you have them merged already, that's saving you a lot of resources, and it's making them so they meet a lot of other criteria, like having high stats and so forth. So that's a good thing. The next one is, do they have access to a refined weapon? And that just means that your unit's going to have more stats from the refine, and they're also going to have potentially useful effects. And a good example of this is Roy. If you refine his binding blade for the effect, then he gets QR4 basically. He gets like Vengeful Fighter for an infantry unit, and he gets steady whatever's defense and res. I can't remember what it's called, but he gets +4 to those stats. So that's really good for a refined weapon. And other examples are like, can you refine the lightning breath? Can you refine like the cleaner or the barbed shuriken, whatever? Any of those are good. The next one is the unit should have distant counter or close counter, which means they're not a meat shield. They're not just sitting there tanking like half the enemy team. This also saves you resources, and by DCCC I mean it's built into the weapon. So you're saving resources by not having to fodder off a distant counter unit to do this, and actually you're also opening up the A slot, which is the stat slot, so you're getting stats from that. The next criteria is that they're colorless, which means they're triangle immune, and you consider Raven Tomes but not meta right now. At least on defense. People use Raven Tomes somewhat commonly on offense. Not Borazai says, have you seen Akris talk about Aegis Camilla as an Omega? I have, and she is considered in the criteria, so we'll talk about that. All right. The next one is high attack, and this is often less considered thing because you're like, oh, Omegatank, we need bulk, which is the next criteria. We need high res, we need high HP, we need high defense. But attack is often more important, and that's why you may have noticed that Akris, talking about these kind of things, has sort of shifted from having different boons to an attack boon. Attack boon on F Grima is his opinion of the best boon for F Grima, and that may not be true in all situations, but that's true in a lot of situations. And that's because securing kills is important. You'll get followed up on with Wings of Mercy if you don't kill the unit, and they also have the potential to get danced. And then these are just some cutoffs I put. So how this works right now is if you meet the criteria, which is for high attack 49, including your weapon, then you get 1 full point. If you meet this lower one, then you get a half point. All right. The next one is high res, decent mixed bulk. So pre-charge AoE specials on mages like Ophelia, mostly Ophelia, are going to damage you based on your visible res. So you want high visible res, and then you also want, obviously, defensive stats for tanking any kind of unit that's coming at you. The cutoff here, I said for mixed bulk, is 55. Units sort of have different defense res, and then this criteria can't really capture res necessarily. Res is slightly better for AoE recharge. So that's something you consider, but it's not really able to be taken account for in this scale. And then we have high HP. This is important because partly heavy traps and panics, and then let me move this down. You also actually want this for things like staying in QR range, because that's going to help you secure kills. That is, in some respects, just as important as high attack. And obviously HP adds to your bulk too. All right, so high HP, I said base cutoff is 40, and then 38 is going to be half point for you. And we need to consider too that 40, 49, these are not the actual stats you're going to be having in the match. You should probably be summoner supporting. That's a lot of stats. You should have a buff bot like M. Morin or Caden. One of the new beast units has like drive, attack, defense, I think, built into their weapon. That's pretty good too. If you give them C slot and skills. C slot and seal slot. That's confusing to say. Then they can drive everything. All right. So now we're gonna apply this to some commonly used units or units that meet good criteria. I actually did a bunch of them, so we can go through that now. So here's the table. Here's green is if they meet the criteria, blue is half, and then Bathcame's here. Red is a special exception. I have synergy written up here, and this takes into account the fact that if you have flyer comps on offense, then you're stacking like 16 stats, 16 off wards or goads or something like that. So that's a lot, right? Here's some other units, and I think we're going to do FOEM here just for fun. So looking at these scores, actually I need to do one more thing too. I need to lower this to half of the dragons. So Noe and Faye and Garen. Garen's okay, actually. Garen's immune. So they are half points for this. Garen is immune with Breath of Blight. All right. So we're looking at Roy first. He's got a 7.5 out of 10, which is pretty good. He is an infantry unit. He deals physical damage. He's a melee unit. You can merge him up. His refine is very good. He doesn't have DC or CC built in, unfortunately. He's not colorless. His attack is borderline. He's only got 46 with his personal weapon plus base. He's got good mixed bulk. And he's got high HP at 44 base. So some other problems that we can't really capture with this scale is that Ophelia is the meta. Reinhardt is the meta. So red units are weak against teams with those threats, which are really common, unfortunately. So even though he's 7.5, you need to take into account the meta. This scale can't take that into account fully. The next one's Valoria. So she sort of meets Gen 3 BST criteria. She's an infantry, does physical damage as a beast. She is not mergeable easily. She can't refine her beast weapon yet, and her attack is quite high, so she's a 7 out of 10. Unfortunately, the scale can't capture this that well, so for some people, this is basically a 0 out of 10. This is prohibitive. I have no Valorias. Many of you probably have no Valorias, or maybe one Valoria, which is not enough to tank well. All right, next we have Garen. I'm not going to go through all of these, I think, just one by one, but we'll go through some. So, as I said, he's immune. He doesn't do physical damage, though. He cannot refine his Breath of Blight as of yet. You need to give him DC, because Breath of Blight's pretty important. You could give him Lightning Breath. So, like, question Lightning, but that's like a questionable decision, in my opinion. And then he meets these other criteria. Did I check off colorless? That's incorrect. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 10. He's still weak to blue units. This applies to Garen. All right, next we have Kagero, who's been talked about a little bit as like she's in the pool of colorless dagger units that have good bulk and good attack. She doesn't get the synergy that Bathcam gets. And unfortunately, she's got way less HP, so Bathcam has borderline HP with 38 base. Fortunately, this is pretty patchable. If you count air, you get plus 10. So that puts you in a pretty good position. Kagero's only got 31 base HP. That's one of her main problems. The other thing is her attack is still borderline. This isn't taking into account any boons. And the reason I didn't do that is because for a lot of situations, you don't want to have to boon your attack to be effective, right? You want to be able to boon your res or your defense. And that's sort of a personal call. So if you are borderline attack and your res is okay, then maybe you boon the attack and you call that good. I think in Roy's case, that's true. In Roy's case, I think you pick an attack boon, you get 49, and you're better off. For other units who have like questionable mixed bulk, like let's say Laszlo. I put Laszlo here as an interesting free-to-play example. He's got only 22 res, so he probably wants a res bane more than of an attack bane. Unfortunately for him, he actually reaches 50 attack with a silver sword, unrefined. And again, that's because I'm thinking you're probably going to want to res refine your silver sword in that situation. Next, we got dragons. As you saw today in my AR match, dragons are susceptible to units like Julia. They're susceptible to the growing number of dagger weapons that are effective against them, and those daggers are wieldable by units like Air, who counter them. Air also counters dragons, and that's one of the main units that actually is common. Like Julia, not that common. She's 5-star exclusive. In most situations, she's not going to bother you that much. Air, however, is pretty much there on, I don't know the number, but like a third of maps maybe. I've got Air on my defense team. A lot of fireballs have Air because she's a good counter to a lot of Omegatanks, and she debuffs, and she does lots of damage. She's just a really good threat. So that's the main thing to consider for dragons. The other video I watched put Faye and Noe in S tier, and that's just not true. They're weak to so many things in them right now. It is true, however, if you're not facing any of those counters, that you just plop them there and they do really well. Again, unless you have them highly invested at first, this is one of the main things going for them, is that you probably have merged one of these units already. So you can just go straight for it, and that's what I did. I had a plus 10 Noe anyway, and at the time, I didn't know as much about AR. I think had I known that the meta would be this way, I would be less likely to have used Noe. I did give Noe Null C Disrupt as well. So yeah. Having pre-merged units, though, is a big factor. And even if they're not perfect, they are better than a lot of things you can just throw together at once. And they save you a lot of resources. So we talked about Bathcam's special synergy. This is true of probably other flyers as well. I guess since we're talking about Grima, she has synergy with flyers. Physical damage, no. This will be the point for Grima. She's not a melee unit. She's not mergeable. She can refine her weapon. Most tank Grimas want Lightning Breath, which gives +9 bulk and distant counter. So that's true. We're gonna say we're probably not using Expiration. And then CC, yes, we have that. Colorless, yes. She has pretty high attack. It's actually kind of low with Lightning Breath. Let me just pull up Grima's page real quick. And we can run through the rest of these stats at the end. So she has 32 base attack. And with the Lightning Breath, that'll reach 44. So that's not great. I would not give that a point. She does have access to an attack boon, which I think is her best option. Attack plus. Her mixed bulk is okay. She actually just meets the cutoff. She's 30-25. And if you keep Dragon Skin on her to counter archers, which are also not super common, but they're a threat, then 40 HP, she meets that criteria. Then she gets +4/+4 with that. So right now she's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So she's, based on this scale, she's a 6 out of 10. But I agree that she is actually probably a bit better than that. And again, this scale is not perfect, right? So I think she's sort of in the orange. I always pick the wrong one. She's in the orange sort of range. In my opinion, when I was making this, I thought that if you were 6.5 or above, then you were in pretty good shape. That's sort of 65 is passing on an exam, 6.5 is passing on this scale. 6 is borderline. If you're below that, then maybe you want to question it as an overall unit. So let's go through one of these red units real quick. So let's say we want to use Levitain, whose got a blade effect in her sword, which I put here. That's like great for us. And then she's a Gen 2 unit. She's got good BST. She meets a lot of these criteria. This is one of the main things that isn't going for her. She cannot get merged. I'm gonna say here, but her weapon's great. Grammar. But her weapon's great, and you're probably gonna give her DC. So again, this skill puts her 5.5, but you gotta consider that this, in a lot of cases, is a special criteria. Where if you don't have them, it's prohibitive. And if you do have them, it's not. So if you have a plus 10 Leviathan already, then Leviathan's like, put that up way higher, right? If you have DC on her, put that up way higher. So it really depends on what your situation is. And that's what the next part of this talk is. But I first want to actually go over Lance users. Lance users are special because they have access to Casablanca, which gives dull ranged in the weapon, is a refinable weapon. So actually, I think Donald has the highest score on this scale out of any unit, just based off of a lot of things going for him. He's in the 3-4-star pool. He's a Gen 1 trainee unit with good BST, better than a lot of other ones that you could have, like Laszlo or Obero. He's an infantry with physical damage. He's not colorless, unfortunately, but he's got good stats, and he's got Casablanca. So Donald is a good option. If I had Donalds, I would merge them up right now and make an AR Omegatank, but I actually can't because I have only one Donald and he's a combat manual. So I have access to no Donalds right now. In my case, I put Obero here because I have Obero. I have enough manuals of Obero to plus 10 merge Obero. And if you look at Obero, Obero's kind of similar. She's got less BST than Donald, and she has less attack than Donald, and slightly better bulk, actually. So she's something to consider. If you have like an attack boon Obero, then maybe she's a little bit comparable to Donald, right? Again, 3 attack is pretty important, but if you don't have Donald and you need to merge up in Obero, then this is good to consider. And this is going to be especially important when we get our, when we get our Astra hero. That's going to make us need to basically have a second offense team, a second set of Megatanks, CC Vantage, and boosters. So for me, I was considering doing this before we found out that Yoon was going to be a Dark Hero. Fortunately, I have a little more time to hopefully get some Donalds. But yeah, so this is good to think about in that situation. And then we have like Blade Tomes, which don't get a high score. We have Fjorm, who actually does okay. Winter Cecilia does okay, but I'm not a fan of armors. I think that like maybe even being armor movement here is like -1 points. That's my opinion. So this scale, I have a shareable sheet. I'm going to share this in the video description when I upload this. I can share this in the Discord. Maybe I'll have a link somewhere on Twitch so people can use this. It's going to be an uneditable version. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to click over here, you're going to copy the whole thing, and you can use it. Or you can actually just like, you can make your own sheet. This is not hard. I've only made 10 columns. The criteria are up here. So last thing we're going to talk about is at the bottom, other things to consider. The scale's not perfect, right? I am a medical student, and this is sort of based off of when you make a medical diagnosis, you need to compare to criteria. For a lot of things, especially in psychiatry, which is what I'm interested in, you use the DSM-5, which basically lays out a list of criteria that say, is it schizophrenia, is it depression? You need to meet 5 criteria that are laid out. So this is sort of translating that into Fire Emblem Heroes. And again, it's imperfect. People criticize the DSM for sort of putting people in these buckets that aren't necessarily like perfect buckets. They're not true per se. And that's one of the limits, is that you can't apply in all situations, right? So I talked about this already, but if you have already resource invested, then it's a different situation for you. your Levitate is going to get a higher score on the scale than my Levitate, which is +0 merged. Um, situations or teams, what do you have trouble with? I have trouble with Julia and green stuff because my Megatank is blue. My team doesn't have counters to those. So if you have a team that counters other things that your Megatank can't take, then that's good. And I put here, like, if you've got Flyers, that's the Synergy tab. If you've got Caden, that sort of puts you in a good situation. If you've got M-Corn and Caden, then you're just, like, stats through the roof, right? Next thing is you got to think about the meta, which is changing. I put here the situation with the red tank and blue mages on defense teams, so that's something to consider. If we get in a weird situation, like Yoon is now going to be more common, so now you got to think about Yoon's a green unit. You maybe don't want to use as many blue mega tanks as you previously did. And special consideration here, Yoon's going to be a dark season defense unit, so you could have a blue tank on light season, or no, you can have a blue tank on Duma season, on Astra Anima season, and that would not be as bad as having a blue unit on light dark season. Again, it's not a perfect scale. I put here, Nino's attack is going to be outrageous, right? So Nino only gets a 4 on the scale, but with the Blade Tome, Nino can do a lot. And then, not every category is worth the same. I assigned all these 1 point just because they were 10 important criteria that I could think of. Again, there's going to be more criteria than this. Some of these are going to be worth more or less depending on the situation. Like, this is probably worth, like, 2 points. Again, I said this is worth -1 point. So these are just things you got to think about. This is a good, I think, example of a scale you could use, and it's a good base scale to start off maybe developing your own scale when you think about who you're going to build for AR mega tanking. So yeah, I'll leave this everywhere possible. You guys can use it, and I'm going to post this on YouTube at some point when I get time to edit that, and I hope this was helpful. I'm going to go to the chat now and see if we have any discussion points. So now Borazai, what's up? I addressed that question. Silver Bow Plus on Jomke, yes. I agree that that's a good move. For CC Vantage, your special doesn't matter that much, and it's going to be unreliable, because if it triggers on the wrong unit, then you're out of luck, right? Magister Meme says Spreadsheet Fire Emblem Heroes, yes. The new Beast unit looking kind of dumb for mega tanking too. So he's an armor unit, and he's got the weaknesses that we talked about. We could run him through. Let's do that, actually. We don't know his stats, but I assume this is going to be green. I assume that's going to be green. I assume that's going to be green. He's a big armor lion thing. He's not colorless. He sort of has DC. This is going to be a half point for him because he's only got DC if he's transformed. Maybe it's like 0.75 points because you can control beast transformation. That's not the situation. He's not that. He has very high BST. He does physical damage. And he's armored. So for me, that's like no. Yeah, I'm gonna put no. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like a 5.75. I forget his name. It's like Wakai or something like that. Something weird. 5.5 out of 10. For now. We don't know his stats. They might be totally outrageous. That might be... I did it again. That might be grounds for bonus points. And actually, I guess if you think he's got DD4, which is like dull, so that's kind of like the same thing as Casablanca. That's pretty good. So this skill puts him at 5.5, but maybe it's more like a 6.5. All right. So he is colorless. I'm pretty sure he's blue, not Borzai. Oh, you're right. He gets +4 on tanking, so that's pretty good. Yeah, so maybe 7. Maybe 7 on the scale. Mystic Tactician says F Grima is technically a melee unit. No, she deals res damage. I should change this to melee damage. Melee damage. She is a melee unit, so I guess I made this kind of confusing. Physical damage, my bad. You're right, you're right. F Krima is a melee unit. She does have BST of a melee unit. So, hey, we put her in the green range. Man, I hate this bucket. Bucket's messing me up. I did it so many times too when I was making this. This took like so long. Alright. Alright. I think we've addressed everything, so we're gonna go back to maybe doing some arena assault now. But thanks everyone for watching this. I will put this up and hope it helps. We can keep discussing it as I'm doing arena assault.